In this 1947 book, Theatre Outlook, J.B. Priestley wrote, "In a good theatrical production, we're offered a piece of life so shaped and coloured and contrived that everything in it, down to the smallest detail, is significant." He continues, "The shape and colour of a room, the way the light falls through a window, the choice of furnishings, the very relation between a chair and a stool, all mean something." So in this video, we're going to analyse the character of Mr. Burling, starting by looking at one of those small details, the use of port.
In the play's first line of dialogue, Mr. Burling says, "Giving us the port, Edna?" "That's right. You ought to like this port, Gerald. As a matter of fact, Finchley told me it's exactly the same port your father gets from him." The drinking of port is significant due to its cost. It is something that was associated with the wealthy in society. The price alone would have been prohibitive and therefore out of reach for the working class. And let's not forget the characters have been drinking champagne before the play begins. In her fascinating book, Drinking in Victorian and Edwardian Britain, Thora Hans states, "The domestic context of alcohol consumption was governed by rules of social etiquette, which both demonstrated and reinforced social class and gender values. Within middle and upper class homes, purchasing, serving and consuming good quality wines and spirits were key ways to demonstrate levels of cultural capital and good taste." Instantly, the audience sees Mr. Burling as someone who wishes to show off to others, and Priestley uses the name-dropping of Finchley to illustrate how Burling is keen to impress his future son-in-law. It's important to note that in speaking to Gerald, the son of upper-class Lord and Lady Croft, Burling is actually speaking to his social superior. This imbalance of power has reduced him to name-dropping in an attempt to endear himself to a family whose social position is one to which he personally aspires. Burling himself has moved from working class to middle class through the success of his business. That's why he occasionally has to be told how to behave socially by Mrs. Burling, his social superior, as the stage directions put it. Early in Act 1, Priestley surprises the audience when Burling delivers a speech to his family during the engagement meal that does not, as you would have thought, focus on his love for his daughter or his fondness of his future son-in-law. Instead, his speech centres around his opinions on the economic future of the country and the failings of neighbouring nations. This speech is an excellent example of Priestley presenting Mr. Burling as a flawed, misled and pompous man. He refers to himself twice in very similar ways, first as a hard-headed businessman and then moments later as a hard-headed practical man of business. And this deliberate repetition on Priestley's part emphasises how Mr. Burling's self-perception is entirely built upon how he sees himself in terms of work and money. Mr. Burling's priorities are not with people or family, but with how much wealth he can accumulate. This results in a lack of empathy for those he exploits in order to grow his fortune. As he himself puts it, a man has to make his own way, has to look after himself. Mr. Burling can be seen to represent the ideology of capitalism, a system where business is privately owned for the sole purpose of making profit. Of course, to make this profit, business owners have to keep labour costs down, as Burling explains. As we go on to learn, Burling's capitalist agenda will be one of the causes of Eva Smith's death. Burling's viewpoint will be directly contrasted by the message soon to be delivered by Inspector Goole, who Burling himself will dismiss as being probably a socialist. Priestley uses an almost ridiculous amount of dramatic irony to criticise the character of Mr. Burling. Dramatic irony is where the audience knows something the character on stage does not. Given that the play was set in 1912 but first performed in 1945, the audience knows that much of what Mr. Burling asserts in the play's opening moments is simply incorrect. His confidence that the Germans don't want war, for example, is doubly wrong, given that not one but two world wars would in fact take place in the coming years. Like many others in the early 1900s, Mr. Burling claims the idea of war is nonsense and fiddlesticks. His dismissive tone reveals how confident he is in his ideas. His error-filled predictions about war, economic growth, and the Titanic being absolutely unsinkable do not simply make the character seem ill-informed and ridiculous. No, the errors about war, the economy, and the Titanic mean that when we hear Mr. Burling's views on the treatment of his own employees and on business, we consider his opinions on these matters to be just as incorrect. Priestley's effective use of dramatic irony here means Mr. Burling's opinions are instantly devalued. Structurally, these examples of dramatic irony occur so early on in the play, even before the arrival of the inspector, to make it very clear that Mr. Burling and everything he stands for is wrong. Initial impressions of Mr. Burling are not good, but that can also be said of other characters. For example, see my video on Sheila. However, what is so noticeable about Mr. Burling is how he ends the play in the same manner in which he started. For example, near the end of the play, Burling discovers that his son Eric is an alcoholic who's stolen money from the office and impregnated Eva Smith. It might therefore be surprising to the audience that the majority of his dialogue with Eric focuses solely on recovering his lost money. Eric's slight against him and the impact upon his business causes Mr. Burling consternation, not the death of his grandchild or the alcoholism of his son. Priestley employs contrast between the older and younger generations to make a point about capitalism and socialism. Unlike his children, Mr. Burling fails to accept responsibility for the death of Eva Smith, telling Eric, "There's every excuse for what both your mother and I did." Burling fails to learn the inspector and Priestley's lesson of social responsibility, reinforcing the inspector's earlier comments about how it is the young ones who are more impressionable. Priestley is criticising the behaviour of the older generation, implying that they are fixed in their ways. In contrast, the younger generation of the Burling family are open to new socialist ideas.
Everything I go through in this video series can be found in the second, updated edition of Mr. Bruff's Guide to an Inspector Calls, and you can pick up a copy through following the links in the description. If you found this video useful, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.